situation in Venezuela is intensifying every day. The right wing is dead set on ousting the democratically elected president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. And they're using their own shortcomings, their own failure to gather 1% of the vote for this referendum, and they're trying to blame it on the government. And in a complete twist of logic, they're saying that the democratically elected president himself, Nicolas Maduro, is somehow guilty of leading a coup. And they're inciting people to come into the streets, and they're provoking bloody clashes, which has resulted in the death of police officers and the injury of dozens of demonstrators. Well, the right wing, backed by the United States government, has had a relentless strategy to overthrow the Bolivarian government of Venezuela since 1999, since Hugo Chavez was elected. And they waited until Maduro was out of the country in the Middle East to renegotiate the international prices of oil to carry out their strategy. So the Bolivarian government has the right to defend themselves. And what we saw this weekend was the Bolivarian people, the people of Caracas, stormed Parliament because they felt like the Congress did not represent them, and they saw the coup in motion, and they had every right to go into Parliament and surround Parliament to defend democracy in Venezuela. The president is not going to step down. The president will have to be forced from office. We have to see the wider strategy that's being carried out against Venezuela, the same thing that the U.S. has tried to do against Cuba for over 50 years, the same thing they did against Nicaragua in the 1980s, the same thing that they've done for decades and over a century against progressive Latin American governments. This is a media war. This is an economic war. There's all types of hoarding in Venezuela by the 1%, by the major propertized sectors, and then they want to turn around and blame it on Maduro and the government as though they're responsible for what amounts to economic warfare. So the Venezuelan leadership is strong, and I believe that the masses of people throughout Venezuela are strong, and they're going to continue to defend their democratically elected government. There's no question that's the opposition's strategy from the beginning. The more violence that they can provoke, almost no matter who's killed, on which side, they can put it all on Maduro. Of course, they can always count on the international media, which amounts to the U.S. media, which serves as a mouthpiece for the Venezuelan opposition, to blame everything on the Venezuelan government. So if there's violence in the streets, they blame it on Maduro. If every week the New York Times is running a sensationalistic expose of Venezuelan hospitals and jails and homes, showing them in a dilapidated state and saying, look at Venezuela, look how horrible it is, without actually looking at the economic warfare that's being waged against Venezuela. So we have an all-out propaganda war and economic war by the Venezuelan opposition, backed by the U.S. and the other rich countries. The first demand of activists here in the United States is U.S. hands-off of Venezuela. We saw the U.S. back a coup attempt in 2002, which led to the death of more than 53 people. And what we're seeing in these late October and November days is a repeat of 2002. The opposition could not muster up the 1% of votes they needed for the referendum, and they're blaming that on Maduro and the Venezuelan government. So they're drooling for the opportunity to overthrow what amounts to 17 years of social gains for the Venezuelan people. The U.S. is for regime change, which is, of course, a euphemism for the recolonization of Venezuela, the rolling back of almost 2 decades of social gains. So a solution has to begin with U.S. and other countries not supporting this right-wing opposition, an end to the media war and the economic war against the Venezuelan people.